And let's go ahead and get started. Surviving the disaster, how to identify bugs immediately and get back on track. In this webinar, Josh and Anais are going to show you how to automate your deployments to your Kubernetes cluster using Codefresh and the Kubernetes Environment and GitOps Dashboards, and then how to easily solve any issues that arise and increase your deployment velocity using Rookout. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring Josh and Anais onto the platform. Hi, guys.
Thanks,
and
Taryn.
I will let you take it away with the presentation. Thank you.
Perfect. So thank you again, everyone, for joining. We appreciate having you here. So my name is Josh Hendrick. I am a senior solution engineer with Rookout, based out of Los Angeles. My background is in software development and DevOps related technologies. And Anais?
I'm afraid you're on mute, Anais.
I thought I unmuted. Okay. Yeah, my name is Anais. I'm a developer evangelist at Codefresh since a few months. Before joining Codefresh, I worked in the blockchain space, doing community management and developer relations for open source projects. Next slide. So let's go over the agenda real quick. You're right in our introduction. Then we will jump into the survival kit, how you can use Codefresh and Rookout to optimize your survival strategy in case of a disaster. Then we will show you in a live demo how you can apply both platforms to your live application. And at the end, we will have our Q&A. Next slide. Thank you. So if you're a developer, if you use anything code related, you likely have some form of Git version control that you can integrate with your CI/CD platform, in this case, Codefresh. We will dive in a bit into more about Codefresh, what Codefresh is, and so on. So you have your continuous integration where you build, test, and then ultimately deploy your code. You might be connected to several different artifact storage solutions for your Helm repository, Helm charts, for your container registry, and more depending on your needs. And then at the end, you want to deploy your application. Now, once your application is deployed, it might still have some issues, and that's where Rookout comes in.
Yes, exactly. So where Rookout fits in, it's really a live remote debugging solution that you configure as part of your code base. So depending upon the language you're using, you're either installing an SDK or an agent as part of your code. And when you deploy that application out into Kubernetes or really any environment that you're running on-prem or within the cloud, we're actually able to real-time give you a live and on-the-fly debugging capability so that without having to change your code or do any redeployments, you can debug your application live and on demand. So with that, we'll give you a quick introduction into Rookout so you kind of know what you're going to be taking a look at as we dive into the demo, and then I'll pass it back to Anais to quickly dive into Codefresh before we move forward. So if you think of what software engineers do on a day-to-day basis, they're most typically either writing new code or trying to understand what's going on within their existing code, right? Going in and debugging potential issues, trying to find out what their code is doing and why it's doing it, right? And we all know as you're part of a software development project and your application code base grows and gets bigger, you end up spending more and more time kind of debugging. And especially if people leave the team and new people are coming in, you spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's going on versus spending time adding value to your application that your customers can take advantage of. So the way that developers are typically going about getting information and understanding what their code is doing while it's running has historically been through log files. I think probably every organization today is using some form of logging. And when an issue occurs, let's say it's in your production environment, you're typically going into application logs. You may have to go through production support teams or operation teams, and you'll kind of filter through the logs to find the information that you're most interested in. If you don't find it, oftentimes you're going back, you're adding new logs to your code, maybe running some quick local tests, pushing that code out to your source code repository system, having the CI/CD tools build and automate that process. Depending on where you're deploying it, it may require some approvals along the way. You need a deployment window for it to get pushed out. And then you're going back into the logs and filtering and trying to find the data that you're most interested in. So what we're saying that you can potentially do is, rather than going through all of that every single time you've uncovered an issue and you'd like to dig in and drill to the bottom of it, what you can do is you can very quickly and easily go directly to your running application, set a few data collection points and collect the data that you're interested in, and save all of that time going directly to the source of what you're interested in. So last slide on Rookout here. What is Rookout? It's really a live data collection and debugging platform. We have something called non-breaking breakpoints, which I'll talk more about a little bit later, which really allow you to collect any data that you're interested in from your environment, really enabling you to solve your customer issues much faster than you typically would in the cases where you're creating a reproduction environment or trying to reproduce locally. You can go directly to the source, get the information you need without additional coding, redeployments, or restarts of your application.
So moving on and talking more about Codefresh before the live demo. What is Codefresh? It's your CI/CD platform. So we offer really powerful pipelines. You can see here one of the examples of a pipeline. That pipeline has 4 different stages, and each stage has multiple steps. Now, what's really special about the steps is that each step within Codefresh is its own container image. So anything that you can either pack up in a container image and then run as a container image or run inside another container image can be one of your Codefresh steps. And that makes your entire pipeline quite modular and adaptable to your needs. And fear not, you can also use private repositories, container registries, and use your private container images in your pipeline as well. Next slide. So once you run your pipeline from start to finish throughout your builds and tests and so on, and your application is deployed, we offer you really nice dashboards that visualize what's actually happening on your deployment, what's happening within your cluster. You want to see whether or not your application is actually in a good health state. So your pipeline might run okay, but then something could happen within the cluster that might break the application or something else and so on. And we want to visualize for you what's actually happening so you can react much faster and more predictable to the changes. So Codefresh is built particularly for microservices. It's Kubernetes, Helm, and Docker native. So we also offer specific dashboards for your Helm charts, as well as for your Kubernetes deployments and for your container registries. And you can use it with any cloud provider and any Git provider as well. Next slide. So, and this is all with the ultimate goal to automate our processes. So when we do all of that to deploy our code, in the end goal, we want to make our lives easier. And oftentimes when we do a lot of manual tasks, we realize that we do a lot of manual tasks and we aim to automate those. When we work with technology, we often forget it and we just do one more manual thing. So instead of that, we want to aim to automate everything that we do. And next slide. So let's head over to our demo and see how you can use both Rookout and Codefresh on your running application.
Perfect. So with that, let me jump into it here. So where I'll start is with the application that we're going to use for the demo today. So this is an application. It's actually a to-do app where you can add items to your to-do list, keep track of all of your to-dos. It's running in Kubernetes on Google Cloud. So it's out there. It's been deployed. And what's been configured ahead of time, we've configured the Rookout SDK with the application. And then I'm going to switch over to Rookout and show you how we can debug a potential issue. So I'm just going to quickly switch over to my VS Code that has my project here, so you can see all of my application code. And what I've done ahead of time is I've come in and I've actually configured the Rookout SDK. So to do that, in this case, it's a Python application, and there's an SDK where you basically install that as another dependency of your application. You import the package, and then you just add a line of code to the entry point of your application. That starts things up. If you guys are Java developers, there's a Java agent, and we support a number of different languages, including Node.js, Ruby, .NET as well. So since now that our application has been hooked up to Rookout, it's been deployed, it's out there running in our Kubernetes cluster, I've recently talked to our operations team or our production support folks that have told me there's some strange behavior happening with the application. So what I'm going to do is go right into Rookout and see if I can get to the bottom of the issue. So I'm going to actually open up my source code files. And what I've done is I've actually connected into my source code repository. I've chosen the specific server environment where my application is running. All I'm going to do is come in. And by the way, Rookout is never able to see your source code. We never get it. Connections to your source code repository happen directly from your browser. And I'm able to open up my source code, come in, and click on a specific line of code. In this case, I have a method here called add to do, which executes some business logic that every time I add a new to do item to our to do list. And you can see after I set the breakpoint there, we've already gotten some data and some information directly into our application. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so you can see. So basically what we've done when we've did this is we've set a non-breaking breakpoint, which acts really as a data collection point. Basically, anytime line 105 in this case of our code is executed while the application is running, we're going to pull in and collect some information real time from the application. And there's a lot of things that you can do here, which we won't go into on this call, but you can set conditionals on how and when you collect data. You can send data to third parties. You can do data masking and data redaction and all sorts of different things. But let's dive into the potential issue here. So I'm going to click on it. And I immediately see that I was able to collect all of the local variables from our application while it was running. I think our operations team was right. Someone is trying to attack our application with the good old attack function call. So looks like very similar to a cross-site scripting attack, right? Where someone tries to inject some code into your application. And it looks like in this case, we're not adequately handling removing or stripping characters that shouldn't be in the data that we're collecting. So that's something that I should be going and fixing within the application. If we needed to dive deeper, we could also drill into the server information, pull in a stack trace, debug third-party libraries and code up the stack, and even pull in tracing information directly to correlate this back to the transaction that I'm most interested in. So what I'm going to do is switch back to the code. And I want to adjust the code so that we basically filter out some of those characters that shouldn't be within our application code. So I'm going to just basically come in here, plug in a new function that will strip some of these characters that we don't want in there from our application. I'm also going to go down into our add to do function that we have down here. And I'm going to modify this so that the to do strings that we're collecting are filtering out that data. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste in the new function, just so I don't make any spelling mistakes as I'm going through. And I have basically called the clean string function, which is now going to go ahead and clean those strings so we don't have any of those characters that could potentially introduce cross-site scripting issues. So I've made the code change. I'm going to go ahead and go in and go back and basically commit this change back up to my repository. So if I do a git status, I can see I have one code change. I'm going to go ahead and add this change, and I'm going to do a git commit, and I'm going to say fixed cross-site scripting issue. And then I'm going to go ahead and push that change, which is going to push it back to our repository and hopefully kick off our CI/CD workflow where I hand it back to Anais. And you're still on mute, Anais.
So, okay, now you can hear me. Okay, we have right now here our pipeline that's gonna get started. And as you can see, executes right now. We can follow the different steps in our output section here. So we can actually see right now the Docker, the container image is being built and pushed to our container registry. So as you can see, we have 3 different stages within this pipeline. Each stage has right now 1 step. Let's take a look at at the pipeline itself and how it's constructed. So here again, I have my project, and within that project, I have my executing pipeline that's right now running. And if we go ahead and go to the workflow with our Codefresh YAML file that defines our pipeline, we can see there's 3 different stages, and each stage right now has 1 step, like mentioned. So the first step is merely responsible for cloning our Git repository that we push the change to. Then the next step will build our container image and push it to our container registry. In this case, we specified to push the container image to our Docker Hub over here. And then we go ahead and deploy our application based on the Helm chart that is within our application itself. Now let's break down this step further. We first take the step that is within our step marketplace that specifies how to deploy your Helm chart to your cluster. You can access further steps here on the right, as well as through the step marketplace itself on the website. So then we provide several arguments, and here's also where Rookout comes in. So we first say we want to deploy to our connected Kubernetes cluster on Google Cloud. So I specified a cluster. This variable here is refers to the variable that I defined within the UI. So I have here my cluster name, and those variables here are Codefresh specific, so they are just plugged in throughout the build, so I don't have to do much with them. That, for example, allows me to automate the updates of the tag of my container image and so on. So within the deploy step, I specify some custom values that I want to use to update my Helm chart that is ultimately deployed on my cluster. So first, I provide the Rookout token that is used to connect the application, the running application, to the Rookout app, the Rookout platform. And I think Josh can talk more about that further in a bit. So, and then I say, okay, I want to update the container tag, the container image tag that's used. And next, I provide 2 additional values for my Rookout environment. And this environment part is specific to Codefresh. So my Kubernetes Environment Dashboard that we will take a look at in a second actually knows about this application, and that it should show this application within the demo environment. It's within the Kubernetes dashboard, and the change here that it should show is the commit message, in this case that Josh just pushed to the registry. So I actually know also throughout the dashboard what changes have happened. We'll take a look at that in a second, and I provide more information on the cluster that I should push to. Now our pipeline should be finished and our application should be deployed. Again, here's the pipeline, and I can just have a look at the different outputs of the different steps themselves. Now, if I want to see the deployed application, I can go ahead and open up the application through the Kubernetes dashboard. So as you can see, I have several information on the application itself, what image it used to deploy the application, the endpoints, some of the labels, whether or not it's actually running properly. I could also, as you can see, I have several different namespaces. So what if I have only a few applications and I don't utilize right now all of those namespaces? I could go ahead and just filter by running applications as well. And then I have the information on which namespace those applications, resources are running on in Kubernetes. So I could do that too. Now, as you can see here, I could open up the application right through the UI as well. And now let's head over to our environment dashboard. Now, in this case, I just have one demo environment that displays the changes of this application. You could have multiple environments depending on your needs. And it runs right now one pod, one application, one deployment. So I can see here my Kubernetes resources that are correlated. Now, this environment dashboard is not specific to Kubernetes. You could also use it with Helm as just shown, or directly through deploying directly Kubernetes resources to your clusters as well. You could also use in that case. Now, as you can see here, I have my specific commit message and the commit message before, and so on. So I can see those additional information. I can also go ahead and open it up. That will lead me to the builds of that of that demo environment. Now, note that this environment is not specific to the application. So why we run right now one pipeline and one environment. You could also have multiple pipelines that refer to the same environment. You could also have one pipeline that refers to multiple environments, and so on. So it's a many-to-many relationship. In that case, it's not just one-to-one, but it's quite modular depending on what you need again. So with that, I'm handing back to Josh to show the updated application.
Perfect.
How do I?
All right. So here we go. So let me jump back into to things here. So just to kind of address a couple things you may have had questions on, as Anais showed, there was a few Rookout specific environment variables that needed to be set. If you'd like to dig in deeper after the call as well, you're welcome to dive into some of our documentation that shows you some of the setup parameters. I just jumped into the Java documentation here, which shows really the setup steps, which are a one-time setup where in the case of Java, you're basically passing a Java agent or an SDK, as we saw in Python. We give you a security token as well that you pass as part of the startup parameters to your application. And then you can tag all of your server instances. So let's say you were running, a set of Kubernetes microservices that were deployed across different pods within your cluster. You could easily come into Rookout. You could filter and select specific pods that you'd like to debug from. That way you could debug and drill into specific issues that might be happening. Let's say you have a login service that's causing an issue. You could drill into that specifically, or you could drill into a larger set of pods that you'd like to debug from. So let's take a look and dive in to see if our code change was actually fixed. So I have my breakpoint set. So hopefully we'll start getting some data here soon. One thing that I can also do if I wanted to come in and restrict the amount of data or adjust how and when Rookout collects data, what I'd be able to do is right click, show some advanced settings, and then even pull up some additional conditions. Maybe I only want to collect a certain amount of data, maybe 5 to 10 transactions. Maybe I want to just collect data for an hour and then have the data collection point turn off. Or even maybe I'd like to use conditions within my code. Maybe if the to-do string or an account ID is a specific account, then I want to collect data. And for audit purposes, I may want to take this data and send it over to a third-party system. So I could actually configure Rookout to send data to any third-party logging or monitoring system that I may be using. So that's basically how you can do things. And then now I could come in, I could set a breakpoint. Again, I could set breakpoints across any part of the code and collect data, and I could come in and I could validate that my to-do string has been successfully cleaned, and all of the data is now as I expect it to be. So I think with that, I will go ahead and pause here and just kind of recap. Quickly into what we showed. So let me switch back to our deck here. Before we get into the Q&A and talk a little bit about exactly what we did, just to kind of recap, right? So what we did was we had an application deployed into a Kubernetes cluster. We had created a pipeline with Codefresh where it automated the build and deployment process. We had Rookout installed as part of that application. And what we were able to do is real time, while there was a potential issue, without having to deploy or change any code, we were able to go into our production environment or our test environment where the application was deployed, dynamically collect some data from the application as it was running, and then immediately go in, make a fix, push it back, have our pipeline automatically do the redeployment, and then come in and we can validate things in the exact same way with Rookout from there. Anais, anything else you'd like to add as a wrap up from there?
I think you summarized it quite well.
Perfect.
So, I mean, I think you have a free trial, right? So both Codefresh and Rookout have a free trial. So if you didn't try any of those like either platform yet, I highly suggest you to go ahead and play around with it. It's quite fun to see the life changes. So yeah.
Absolutely. Feel free to reach out. I know there's been some questions coming in into the Q&A, so we'll definitely spend some time to address those. But as Anais mentioned, feel free to drop us an email, reach out, sign up for a free trial, and we'd be happy to help you guys out further.
Awesome. Thank you so much,
so with
Josh
that,
and Anais.
back to you. Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's just get to these questions. And to everyone else in the audience, if you have any questions, now is the time to enter those. Josh, I believe you answered this very quickly in your presentation, but just to reiterate, how many languages does Rookout support?
Yes, good question. So right now we support Java and any language based on the JVM, so Scala, Kotlin, all of that kind of stuff. We support Node.js, Python, .NET, both .NET Core and Framework, Ruby as well. And we're looking to support some additional languages in the future, possibly things like Go and various others. Definitely appreciate feedback on what you guys are using as well.
Excellent, thank you. And then also a question that came in during your portion, Josh. What container types do you deliver? Docker, Podman, et cetera? Do you validate them for weaknesses?
So I think that may be more focused on the Codefresh side of things, but any Docker containers that we're building, Rookout is SOC 2 Type 2 compliant. We have regular pen tests that happen, and we do regular security scans against anything that we put out.
Anais, do you want to elaborate on Codefresh? What kind of container types do we deliver?
So I think that's actually something Costas could provide further details, since I haven't extensively used other container types within Codefresh. So maybe Costas wants to jump in.
Yeah, this question is a bit broad. Codefresh supports all containers. We don't have any security service built in. What Codefresh is doing is it allows you to connect to any external security scanning services. So you can run, let's say, things like Snyk, Prisma Cloud, Aqua Security, and make sure that your containers are scanned. Within the pipeline, you can place a step that is responsible for security scanning, and you can make your pipeline fail if the security scans do not pass, so that you know that if an image is pushed to the registry, then it's also validated by security. Or you can even have a report from vulnerabilities and set a limit and say only push this image if it doesn't have any, let's say, critical errors.
Perfect, thank you, Kostas. And for Josh, if the application has high throughput, does Rookout provide ways to analyze and filter the captured code paths?
Yes, and I kind of showed that briefly there at the end, but we definitely do. So if you have a high throughput application and you're constantly getting data that's passing through the system, as you probably saw, we would continue to collect data unless you apply some sort of filters, right? So you can restrict based on the amount of transactions that you'd like to capture, based on a specific time period, or even based on conditional data within your code. So let's say you were trying to debug a production system and there was a specific customer account, as an example, that was having problems that you were trying to debug with them. You could set up a conditional within your code that says if the customer account is equal to XYZ customer, then you want to collect data only from that customer. And kind of hand in hand with that, if you have PII data that shouldn't be viewable by developers that are using the tool, admins can go into Rookout and they can configure data redaction rules so that we would filter out social security numbers, credit cards, any type of information which shouldn't be viewable, so you can kind of drill in to the exact information that you're most interested in.
Thank you, Josh. To the audience, I just launched a poll while we answer our last questions here. I have 3 more questions. Luca asks, what kind of performance overhead is expected when Rookout is enabled, and can it be remote enabled or disabled?
Good question. Yeah. So performance overhead, it's typically under 1%. I like to compare it a little bit to APM tools in terms of how they're different. because a lot of folks are familiar with APMs like AppDynamics and New Relic and Datadog. The main difference is that when you've configured an APM tool, they're constantly in the background collecting data, pulling in information, giving you kind of dashboards of information that can help you analyze and get to the bottom of defects. Where Rookout is different is we're trying to take a little bit of a different approach. We're trying to add as little overhead to the application as possible. So when you've configured Rookout, by default, we're adding pretty much zero overhead. All we're doing is spinning up a new thread and waiting for users to come in and set those data collection points that you saw. Once you've set those data collection points, the overhead is about the same as if you were to add a log line into your code at that same line. And it's typically well under 1%. So that's kind of the gist of it. And what was the second part of the question, Taryn?
That was, can it be remote enabled or disabled? Yeah.
So you can basically dynamically go in and you can add it to an application, and you can remove it as you need to. So the breakpoints on demand, you don't necessarily have to be logged into Rookout to have them enabled. You can set them and you can log out. You can go somewhere else. You can start collecting data. You can send it to a third-party system. If you're using something like Splunk or Elasticsearch, we can be configured to connect data, really any third-party system that has an API available. And then you can go in, log in when you're ready. You can disable them on demand and stop collecting any additional data.
And I believe you already answered this in your first question, but Paolo asked, is Rookout like Datadog? You kind of answered that, but is there anything you want to elaborate on specifically with the differences with Datadog?
Yeah, no, I think I covered it. I think I covered it pretty well. They're on the APM side, constantly collecting data. And I think between APM tools and Rookout, there is actually a nice combined use case. So we're not saying use Rookout instead of an APM, for example. We're basically saying, okay, typically operations teams and production support type teams are going into APM tools, identifying issues, and they typically get you down to a general area of the code where there was a potential issue. Maybe there was an exception thrown, and they'll give you a specific class or method that they know caused a potential issue or a slowdown, something like that. What we can then do is switch over into Rookout to dive to the next level of detail and really give developers an experience very similar to what they would expect to get in a local IDE when they're debugging and setting breakpoints, except you can do that now from your live applications and even in production.
Great, thank you. And I have one last, or I might have a couple more questions here actually. Can you deploy using Argo CD and still use Rookout?
So yes, you can. I would say, so I haven't tried like specifically deploying with Argo CD and then using Rookout on that deployment. But what I did ultimately right now in this webinar was to have a Helm chart and deploy my application through that Helm chart. And I could integrate with Argo CD and use the same Helm chart and just let Argo know that that's the desired state of my application. That's basically how I want my application to look like. And Argo will make sure it's deployed. And then maybe I can share quickly my screen for, can I share it? Okay, so this is the GitOps dashboard. So you would see, it would just basically be another layer of observability if you want to go far and implement with GitOps as well and use Argo CD for your deployment. And you would still be able to access Rookout at the same time once you, like, as long as you provide the Rookout token to your application throughout the deployment, which you would do through, for example, through Codefresh. Maybe Costas wants to add something, but if not.
Yeah, it works as expected. The deployment method is unrelated to Rookout. You can deploy using just plain kubectl, Argo CD, Flux, Codefresh, or whatever deployment tool you prefer.
Excellent. Well, that is all of our questions for today. Thank you so much to Josh and Anais. And I want to remind the audience that this was recorded. I will send you a recording tomorrow along with the slide deck and we will be publishing a blog post. So I will send you a link to that blog post, which is basically going to step you through exactly what Anais and Josh did during the presentation so that you can do it for yourself. So thank you as well for joining, Jorge. Thank you everyone for joining. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time on Codefresh Live.